When I first invited my nephew Ethan to stay over at my house, I thought it would be a quiet weekend. My sister Rachel had called me a week earlier, explaining that she and her husband were heading out of town for a small getaway, their first in years, and they needed someone they could trust to watch Ethan. I didn't hesitate. Ethan was 12 years old, full of energy, and always had a smile on his face. I was his Aunt Claire, the one who spoiled him with milkshakes, books, and late-night movies whenever I got the chance. I figured this would be a chance to spend some quality time together. But little did I know, things would take a wild turn. On Friday afternoon, Rachel dropped Ethan off at my place. He arrived with a duffel bag, a backpack, and an excited grin. "Aunt Claire," he shouted as he jumped out of the car. I wrapped him in a hug, and Rachel laughed. "Good luck. He's been talking about this stay over all week." I waved her off. "We'll be fine. Don't worry. Go enjoy your trip." The first couple of hours were exactly what I expected. We unpacked his things, set up his sleeping bag in the guest room, and ordered pizza. Ethan was talkative, telling me all about school, his favorite video games, and how he was hoping to join the soccer team in the fall. After dinner, we played a board game and watched a family-friendly adventure movie. By 10 o'clock, I was yawning, but Ethan was still buzzing with energy. "Bedtime," I announced, but he begged for just 10 more minutes. I agreed, and eventually he fell asleep. That first night was peaceful, but the next day, everything changed. Ethan woke up earlier than me, which wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the sound of pots clanging and cupboards slamming downstairs. I threw on a robe and hurried down, only to find the kitchen looking like a whirlwind had passed through. Ethan stood at the counter, wearing an apron twice his size, with pancake batter smeared on his cheek. "I was trying to make breakfast for you and Claire," he said, grinning sheepishly. The stove was on, with a pancake burning in the pan. Flour dusted the counters, and eggshells littered the sink. I laughed, even though I knew it would take me an hour to clean. "Well, Chef Ethan, looks like we've got ourselves a Saturday morning project." Instead of scolding him, I helped him finish making pancakes. He was proud of himself when we sat down to eat, and though they were a little burnt and oddly shaped, they tasted better than any I'd had in a long time. But the wildness didn't stop there. That afternoon, Ethan begged me to let him build a fort in the living room. I agreed, thinking it would keep him busy. I had no idea he meant a giant fort made from every blanket and pillow in the house. By the time he was done, the entire room looked like a miniature castle, complete with tunnels, towers, and a throne made from couch cushions. He looked at me proudly. "Want to come in?" I crawled inside, and to my surprise, it was actually cozy. We sat in there for hours, telling stories and laughing until our stomachs hurt. But then, as evening rolled around, Ethan got an idea that really turned things upside down. "Aunt Claire," he said, "can we camp outside in the backyard tonight, like in a tent?" I hesitated. I hadn't been camping in years, and I didn't even own a tent anymore. But Ethan's eyes sparkled with excitement, and I couldn't bring myself to say no. "All right," I said, "but we'll have to improvise." We grabbed the blankets from the living room fort and headed outside. With some rope, lawn chairs, and a lot of determination, we managed to set up a makeshift tent. Ethan was thrilled. We brought out flashlights, snacks, and even roasted marshmallows over the small fire pit I had in the yard. It felt magical, sitting there under the stars, listening to the crickets and telling ghost stories. But just as we were starting to settle into our blanket tent, we heard rustling in the bushes. Ethan froze. What was that? I tried to sound calm, probably just a raccoon. But when the sound grew louder, Ethan's eyes went wide. Suddenly, a neighborhood dog, Max, the golden retriever from next door, came barreling out of the bushes, wagging his tail and barking. Ethan screamed, then laughed when he realized it wasn't a wild animal. Max, of course, jumped into our tent and knocked everything over. Our blankets tumbled to the ground, and the snacks spilled everywhere. By the time I got Max back to the neighbor's yard, Ethan and I were both laughing so hard we could barely breathe. That night, instead of staying outside, we ended up sleeping in the blanket fort back in the living room. The next day, Sunday, was supposed to be calm, but once again, Ethan had other plans. He convinced me to take him to the park, where he challenged me to race him on the playground's climbing wall. I hadn't done anything like that in years, but I gave it a try. Halfway up, I realized how out of shape I was. Ethan, of course, sipped up to the top like a pro and cheered when I finally made it. Later, we bought ice cream, and Ethan managed to spill half of his cone on his shirt. He laughed it off, telling me, "That's what extra napkins are for." By the time Rachel came to pick him up that evening, the house looked like a disaster zone. There was still pancake stains in the kitchen, blankets covering the living room, and muddy shoes by the back door. But when Ethan hugged me goodbye, he whispered, "This was the best weekend ever." Rachel raised an eyebrow when she saw the mess. What on earth happened here? I just laughed. Things took a wild turn. After they left, I sat on the couch, exhausted but smiling. I hadn't realized how much I'd needed that weekend. Ethan had reminded me of something important, that life doesn't always have to be neat and orderly. Sometimes the messiest moments are the ones that bring the most joy. And though I was glad to finally rest, I knew one thing for sure. The next time Ethan asked to stay over, I wouldn't hesitate, because sometimes wild turns are exactly what we need. When I never